Second hour of a Friday edition of One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. And time now to welcome in senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, whose weekly appearance on One Bills Live is presented by Pepsi. Pepsi is the official soft drink of the Buffalo Bills. Food deserves Pepsi. All right, Greg, not the sexiest of matchups, Bills-Saints. And, boy, the Saints special teams really let them down last week. Holy crow. That game was over in the first quarter, and it was due almost exclusively to a horrible special teams unit. And I know you don't usually watch special teams, but
I happen to see those plays.
Yeah, it was hard not to notice what a disaster it was. My God, They blinked, and it was 21-0. The game was over.
I know. And look, you guys know this because you remember when Josh Allen was a rookie in the beginning of his career. When you have a young quarterback who's playing, the rest of the team really can't let you down. It's almost impossible for a young quarterback, and Steve, you can appreciate this, I'm sure, really well, for a young quarterback to really sort of get his feet on the ground and for the team to feel like you have a chance when the other parts of the team just really let you down. You know, the analogy would be, let's say in baseball, if you have bad starting pitching and you're down 6-0 in the fourth inning all the time, then it makes it look like you have a really bad team. And for a young quarterback, and I guess Rattler has not won a game that he started, but there's just everything has to fall into place for a young quarterback to really have a chance to win.
Yeah, and I get that, but I'll say this. I'll probably putting the huge hex on Spencer Rattler here because I kind of like what I see from him. He is not.
So do I,
it's not too much for him. He's got live arm.
No.
He's a good athlete. He seems to have a good feel in the pocket. He's been betrayed by some bad drops early in games. And I just think he's not the problem in New Orleans. I think they might have a guy. I think they got a guy who they can move forward with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that part remains to be seen, but I agree with what you've said about the way in which he's played. And the thing that you have to be careful when you play him, and, you know, I'm sure most people just assume that this is a 40-10 Bills win. But what you have to be careful about with him is he is an aggressive thrower of the football, and he is going to turn it loose and make throws down the field. And he's a very good thrower. I mean, when you just talk about pure arm talent, and I know that two words, arm talent, are overused, but this is a guy that can snap it off. The ball comes out really well. He'll be aggressive throwing it down the field. And, you know, sometimes all of a sudden, you know, he hits 2 40-yard plays and all of a sudden you're in the middle of the second quarter and you're in a 10-10 game, you know, and you just got to be careful about that because he is not a cautious, risk-averse player.
Right. And despite all of that, Greg, you look at his yards per attempt, and it's the third lowest in the league at 5.37. Yeah. This despite the fact that they're often in long down and distance situations, mainly due to pre-snap penalties. But only Bryce Young, Cam Ward, and Joe Flacco have a lower yards per attempt. What do you think is the biggest reason for that low number?
I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, when you're in long yardage a lot, you know, it's very difficult. I'm sure he's being talked to a lot about not turning the ball over because, you know, no team wants to turn the ball over, but they certainly can't afford to just because they're not a good enough team. So I'm sure in certain situations he's told to pull back a little bit. Obviously, they're not a very good third down conversion team because of that. They're probably, I would guess, in the lower 5 or 6 when it comes to third down conversions. I don't have that number in front of me, but that would be my guess. So he's in a tough situation right now because they get behind and it's hard to play that way. You know, sometimes they run the ball well. They actually ran the ball well a couple of weeks ago when Kamara had, I think, close to 100 yards. But that was not the case. This week was almost a game, as you said, Brownie, you've almost got to throw it out for the way it started. I mean, you can't play when it's 21-0 before you even seem like you're in the game. So it's hard to get a total read in 3 games. You know, I don't think that they're a terrible roster. I mean, that's the thing. If you look at their roster, you know, I would have bet that people would thought that this O-line going into this season would be a top 10 O-line in the league.
They got all first round
obviously
picks.
They're starting the rookie at left tackle, and but he was a high pick who
Yep.
most people believe should be a high pick. But the rest of that O-line is a pretty good O-line.
There's 4 first-round picks
Right.
on that O-line.
Yeah.
I know.
There's a lot of
I know.
physical gifts. There's a lot of physical gifts up front. And
No question.
Yeah. I got a question for you. You're looking at the Bills. The Bills are 3-0, obviously, and
Yeah.
every team. Now, I'll say this: every team they've played, they have yet to play a team who has won a game at the time they played them. So it hasn't been a looking like a tough schedule, at least off the top, except for they've been playing some pretty good teams. So the Bills can run the ball. They don't give
Yes.
up. They don't give up very many sacks.
No.
They don't turn it over. They score a ton of points, and they also are top 5 in the league in big plays, like plus 20-yard plays. I know it's short passes, long runs, and they don't look like over-the-top big plays, but they are top
Those
5.
count, though. You know what, Steve? Those count.
Yeah, they do count. And so I'm asking you, I guess, basically, how tough is this Bills offense right now to beat?
Well, I think one of the key things that every coach wants offensively, and we're kind of talking overview stuff here right now, is you want to be able to win in multiple ways. And Steve, you know that with the teams you were on in Buffalo, you could win any way, the way any game demanded. You could win with Jim Kelly having to throw it 40 times for 350 yards. You can win giving the ball to Thurman Thomas 25 times. You could play any way a particular game demanded, correct? Wasn't that
Right.
true of your teams?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Bills are in that situation right now where they can win offensively any way a particular game demands. I mean, you look what happened week 1. All of a sudden they're down. And, this week, everybody's complaining that the Bills don't throw the ball down the field. I hear a lot of people talking about that. Well, it seemed to be okay when they had to throw it a little down the field week 1, and they were able, and they won the game. So they can play offensively multiple ways and be effective. I mean, this is the team, and I know Josh Allen's a part of it to some degree, but they have the most rushing attempts in the league. So this is a team that can, I think they want to run the ball. Look what they did in the last game against Miami out of 13 personnel running the football. And Brownie, I just go back to what you talked about in training camp, because you guys are there and I wasn't, about Hawes and the value that he's going to bring to this offense. So now they have 13 personnel as I don't want to say it's a foundation, but they run meaningful plays out of it. And they've been running the ball really well out of it, as we saw against Miami. So they can play in multiple ways out of multiple personnel packages. There's more pre-snap movement than ever with Joe Brady. This is really a multi-dimensional offense that you almost forget that the quarterback, when necessary, can be special because he just plays the game the way the game demands.
Here's a microcosm that would illustrate Steve's point with statistics. In 12 and 13 personnel this year, the Bills are averaging 7.2 yards per carry. That leads the league. And
Correct.
They are 10 for 10 passing for 84 yards and a touchdown in 12 and 13 personnel. That gives you a picture as to how unstoppable this offense is right now. And with that in mind, Greg, I want to ask you this, because we start the second half against the Dolphins, and here comes Miami with a 4-4 front, 4 defensive tackles, 2 edge rushers, and 2 linebackers. And I know Joe Brady said, "What the heck is this?" But by the same token, the Saints did something very similar defensively to stop Seattle's run game. So my question to you is this. What level of shift are we witnessing right now by NFL defenses to combat the surge of powerful and effective run games?
Well, there has been a definite increase as well, meaningful increase over the last 4, 5, 6 years in the use of multiple tight end sets in the league. So now you're dealing, and again, it's not just the run game, although that's a major part of it, Brownie, but now you're seeing more and more teams line up in 12 personnel, meaning 1 back and 2 tight ends, and 13 personnel, 1 back and 3 tight ends. And if you have tight ends that are receivers, this really dictates to the defense as to how do they want to play this. Because if they're going to stay base, or if they're going to go, in a sense, heavy, as you suggested, then they're very susceptible to the pass game. So if you line up, let's say, with Hawes and Kincaid, just for the sake of discussion, in 12 personnel, One of those guys can line up anywhere in the formation and be a really good receiver because he's athletic. So now, how do you deal with that? If you're going to play with your base defense, it's a problem. If you're going to line up in nickel, now the run game really becomes an issue. One thing I've really noticed this year, and this may not be the case with 12 and 13 personnel, but I've really noticed how many more teams are running at the nickel. And that's something that's really stood out to me on film because very few nickels can really buck up and play the run game. And by the way, there are some defensive fronts in which the nickel has to be a B gap defender in the run game. And there's not many guys that can do that.
But
so, you're seeing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, but we've seen teams pivot away from that. Just as early as 2 years ago, the Bills were 95% nickel. It was their base defense. Taron Johnson has played the fewest snaps this season than we've seen in the last 5 years, and they're putting Dorian Williams as the third linebacker on the field because of that very thing.
I know. And so it depends on the team and how they want to play. But, I'll give you an example. The Seahawks last night, they played nickel on every snap, okay? Every snap but one. And the reason they did it, even though the Cards played with a pretty good percentage of 12 and 13 personnel, is because of Witherspoon is one of those guys that can really play the run exceptionally well and is super competitive and feisty and tough. So it depends on who your nickel is. And then you don't feel like you're shortchanged in the pass game, in your pass defense. So that's a case-by-case deal with each team. But, teams are clearly running the ball. Look, we saw last year, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the stats become the stats, and I live in this world, but I think the top 5 rushing teams in the league last year made the playoffs. I think the top 3 or 4 rushing teams right now might be undefeated because I know that the Bills are number 1. I know the Eagles, I think, are 3. I forget who's 2.
Indianapolis.
Colts.
Yeah, Colts.
Indianapolis. Yeah, the run game, teams are beginning to understand that the run game is an important part of offense. Everybody got caught up, and believe me, offensive coaches still want this. Everybody got caught up, and everything has to be an explosive play. But, a lot of coaches are starting to think more old school in the sense that it's a 3 and 4 quarter game and that you can set things up. I think we reached a stretch where coaches started to think everything was an individual play. Let's make a big play. But now let's go through a game and see how defenses react to that and build it up over the course of a game.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot, and when we talk to you, we get into these X's and O's, where the nickel and how it matches up with the 13. Yeah. I do too, but the more you talk about it, the more it reverts back the other way. It's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes, right? It's the players you've got. If you've got a nickel that can stand up to it, like the Bills had with Taron Johnson, hey, we're playing nickel. And if you don't, then you're a problem. If you get better players, better players make you more flexible and more versatile and able to win more ways, which is why I think there are more and more tight ends coming into the league, and they're moving to these guys are moving to the offensive side of the ball. They're too big to play wide out. They're too big. Right. They're too small to play offensive line, and they don't have either something else. They don't play defense, or they can't play D-line. So you get more and more quality tight ends out of the college ranks, and they got to find a place to use them, and it puts the defense in a bind. I think it's really fascinating to see this evolve with the players that the college game has given the pros. That guy McBride from the Cardinals, the tight end. Yeah, he's a fantastic player.
Yeah. But it's funny you mentioned that because the Bills have them, but there's not many Jackson Haws in college football because in college football, there's not that many tight ends that are attached players that really are asked to block defensive ends. And I've had this conversation with Ross Tucker. You guys know Ross, and he was telling me, which I know from watching tape, what it means when you have a tight end who can be attached, who can block defensive ends, and Steve, you know all about this, who can block defensive ends or outside backers if it's a 5-2 front in the game one-on-one. If you have a tight end that can block a defensive end one-on-one in the run game, that opens up so much more that you can do in your run game.
That's also one of the reasons Dan Orlovsky came on. That's one of the reasons the Bills' run game can be so creative is because they've got that guy at the end of the line of scrimmage. Yeah. Orlovsky said the Bills' running game is the most creative he's seen in the National Football League. That's probably a reason why, or one reason why.
Yep.
Yeah, because it allows you to do so much more. Because how many times when I'm watching tape, do I see that I'm trying to figure out why are they not getting to the second level the way they need to block a second level player, normally a linebacker? And that's because they need a tackle to basically block a defensive end. If you have a tight end that can do that, you can get to the second level so much better. And, I think the Bills are certainly in that situation with Jackson Hawes, who, as I mentioned to you before, when I watched film of the tight ends coming into the draft, he was without question the best blocking tight end that was coming out.
Greg, I wanted to get your thoughts on what is a revamped Saints secondary. We know, because obviously they trade. His name escapes me. The corner went to Washington in a trade late last year. Their former number one,
and they lost to Debo. Yeah,
right. And then Tyrann Mathieu up and retires in the offseason. So they signed Julian Blackman, but he goes on IR early in the season.
Yeah.
And now you've got rookie Jonas Sanker alongside Justin Reed, who's a new free agent signee, but a veteran player, and Alontae Taylor and McKinstry on the outside. What do you make of this secondary? Where do you feel they're vulnerable, if anywhere?
Well, it's funny because I think that they're actually more vulnerable when they play their nickel, because they're playing Isaac Yiadom at the other corner, when they're nickel, because Taylor moves inside. Alontae Taylor plays outside in their base, but it's slot in their nickel. And I think they're actually more vulnerable when they're in their nickel. But again, Sanker was a player out of Virginia that I liked coming out. I thought he was an aggressive kind of downhill guy. It's always tough to get a read in college how he's going to react to a true NFL passing game. So that's sometimes tough to tell. But it's funny you mentioned their defense. Their defense has pretty good players. I mean, they're an odd team right now because I agree with Steve when I don't think Rattler's the problem. And their defense, if you look at their front group, let's take their front group when they're in nickel, just for sake of discussion. They've got some pretty good players. Brian Bresee is a really good player. He's exactly what you want at the D tackle position. Demario Davis, it seems like he's been playing for 100 years. He's still a quality player. Warner's a really solid player. Grandison is a solid player. I mean, this front group, and Cam Jordan is still there playing meaningful snaps. This is not a bad front group at all. So, it's just who knows how the season's going to progress, but this is not necessarily an easy defense to play against.
Right, and is the strength is up front defensively, correct?
Up front.
Yeah.
And I guess, is Chase Young due to be back this week? I
Not
saw
looking
that
good. He hasn't practiced at all this week.
Yeah, he's been out of practice.
Oh, he hasn't? Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier in the week, they said he would, so then he won't be back. Yeah.
Doesn't look like it.
But Bresee, and you'll see, I mean, I'm sure, Brownie, you've taken a look at their defense. Bresee's a really good football player.
Let's flip it over. Talk about their offense a little bit. Chris Olave. Brandon Cooks, Rashid Shaheed. I thought Shaheed has had some pretty good moments this season for the Saints. And
he can run.
He's
a guy, again, the thing is, everybody just looks at some of these teams and assumes they're bad. The thing is, though, and Steve, you know this, any NFL team can beat you any given week. It's the NFL. Shaheed is one of those guys. There's maybe 3 or 4 of them in the league, and I'm being honest here, just from film study, that have terrifying speed. Jamison Williams is one of those guys. There's a lot of guys we say, oh, he's a 4.3 guy, he's fast. But, as you know, Steve, not everybody plays like that. Shaheed's one of those guys like that. He's got terrifying speed. And the last thing, you want is all of a sudden, he catches a 70-yard touchdown, which, he can do. And Olave, unfortunately, he's battled concussions. He's had a few really uncharacteristic drops this year, So I don't know what his mental health is. I mean, he had 2 really bad concussions a year ago, but at his best, he's a terrific receiver. And Cooks, wherever he goes, he produces. So it's not a bad receiving core. And like I said, you look at this O-line, this is actually a really good O-line. And so look, it's a new coach. It's a new coaching staff. They're giving the job to Rattler. Obviously played some last year, but he's theoretically a full-time starter now. This stuff takes time with the new staff. So we'll see it. you know how sometimes what happens, guys, is all of a sudden it's week 6. You hope it's not this week that a team all of a sudden starts to look different because it starts to come together.
Right. Greg, thanks as always. Appreciate the insight. We'll catch up with you next week.
But that was a fun conversation, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. That's Greg Cosell joining us, senior producer from NFL Films. Bills Mafia, it's tailgating season. And there's nothing better than an ice-cold Pepsi Zero Sugar to pair with your tailgating food rituals. As the great Josh Allen once said, Bills fans deserve Pepsi. For the home opener, Bills Mafia brought it. So did Pepsi. They kicked off the tailgate season the right way, and they expect to keep it rolling throughout the rest of the year. Bills tailgates deserve Pepsi. Go Bills.